I mean, you say that you took your orthodoxy with you in a way, but were there deficiencies in the Orthodox Church or churches that you saw that made you go, okay, so I'm apparently not going to find a church that doesn't have these particular ailments or what?
One thing that I'd hoped I would find an answer to, I just kind of took it by faith, but I'd hoped that the more I was Orthodox, I would find an answer. One of those issues was, how does the teaching authority of the church work? How can I objectively know what is right versus wrong? Is artificial contraception wrong? In Orthodoxy, what is an ecumenical council? How do I know what is definitive and what is not? What is binding on me? What is not? Those were all questions that I was asking because, as somebody who's Orthodox, I want to live my faith in accordance with what the church tells me to believe. So when I started asking those practical questions, I just continued to see problems. And I had seen this back in 2011 when I originally considered Orthodoxy. I saw some problems here in answering those kinds of questions from Orthodoxy. I continued to see them as I once again discerned Orthodoxy. And then as I was Orthodox, I still continued to see those problems, and I just wasn't getting answers to that question or to those questions. But what I was seeing is a strength to the Catholic claims of the magisterium, how it works, its objectivity, and, in identifying what is right, what is wrong, what it teaches definitively, what it doesn't, what is an ecumenical council, what is not. I would continue to see strength for, the Catholic position here, and an ongoing deficiency, an ever more increasing deficiency in Orthodoxy. And there were other things that were going on at the time in Orthodoxy that really just pointed out the need for the Orthodox to be able to have an objective magisterium and an objectively identifiable teaching authority. And I wasn't seeing answers, and I wasn't seeing it there in Eastern Orthodoxy. So again, that continued to make me say that I really need to continue to study the issue of teaching authority, the papacy, the magisterium, and compare those issues between the two.
You already know the answer to this, but sometimes you'll hear somebody say, like, the Protestants were so divided, so I became Catholic. And I'm like, yeah, but look at us. Like, it's nice to pretend that we're all united, but in actuality, have a look. There's a lot of fracturing going on. There's a lot of infighting going on. And I imagine someone might have a similar objection when you say, I wanted to know where is the definitive teaching, but then Catholics in today's day and age are also struggling with that about all sorts of different issues. They might say, well, my bishop actually says it is okay, as like your priest said, right? And you might say, well, I mean, maybe you can help us understand where do you go for the definitive teaching? Is it the current pontiff? Without getting too far in the weeds, but are we just sort of accidentally still manning the Catholic position when really it has just as many problems as Orthodoxy, or no?
Well, those were the questions I was having to ask. Okay. Does Catholicism actually offer something that's different than Orthodoxy in this area? And what I noticed is, there actually is a way to, number one, objectively identify the magisterium of the Catholic Church as opposed to Orthodoxy, but also, you mentioned there are some things that are in dispute in Catholicism, just as they're in dispute in Orthodoxy. But the difference is this: Catholicism has a way to objectively settle those issues. I'm not saying that in Eastern Orthodoxy.
So to give an example, you had some Orthodox said you must be baptized again. And then many people said, no, you don't. Where would you have gone for the definitive answer in your Orthodox church for that? There may not have been a place.
For a definitive answer on reception of converts into the Orthodoxy?
Whether you should have been baptized having been baptized before. Like, that's an example, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, you could start, of course, on the local level with the practice of your local bishop, but then that just begs the question, what happens when you have another bishop who has a different one? And I was listening to Callistus Ware, who was saying, look, this is a big, huge issue in Orthodoxy. This is not just a difference in practice. This is a scandal, according to Callistus Ware. And he was saying, this Great and Holy Council of 2016 that's supposed to be coming out, I think it was 2016, the Great and Holy Council that was going to be coming out in Orthodoxy was supposed to settle that issue. Well, of course, it never did. But, I saw other figures like Callistus Ware saying, look, this is a huge issue. So obviously I couldn't just say, well, what does my local bishop say? Because there's other local bishops who are going to say something different. That doesn't work. Well, what does this synod say? Well, there's other synods who say something else. So obviously you're going to have something on a universal level that can settle this issue.
Yes.
Again, that's not to say that everything has been settled already in Catholicism, but what I want to say is the difference, however, is Catholics have a way to settle this issue on the universal level, whereas Orthodox don't. Some Orthodox might say an ecumenical council or a great and holy council or something like that, but again, they were calling the Great and Holy Council for over 100 years, and then it came and went and really didn't do anything. So a lot of people hung their hat on the Great and Holy Council, hoping that it would resolve all kinds of issues in Orthodoxy, and really it didn't do a whole lot. But again, other Orthodox might say, well, an ecumenical council can resolve these issues, but it just then begs the question, what is an ecumenical council? Some will just define it as, well, it's something that's called by the emperor. Okay, well, we don't have an emperor anymore, so that doesn't work. Some will say, well, it's a council that's confirmed by the Pentarchy, Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, Constantinople, and Jerusalem. Okay, well, Orthodox aren't in communion with Rome, so I guess they're not going to be able to have an ecumenical council right now as long as the schism between East and West persists. So that doesn't work.
What's the third answer?
There's a whole bunch of answers. Reception. There's another one called receptionism, and that is all of the Orthodox churches accept this council as ecumenical. Okay, well, that begs the question, what is an Orthodox church? Because there were plenty of churches in the first millennium that didn't accept Chalcedon, or Chalcedon. Some people can correct my pronunciation there. There are plenty of bishops and bishops and churches, local churches that didn't accept that. So it kind of begs the question: who are the Orthodox? And then number two, are we saying that they all have to accept it? So all 16 autocephalous churches have to receive this council as ecumenical, and otherwise it's not ecumenical and it's not authoritative? Is it only that my local synod has to accept it as authoritative, or do all of them have to accept it as authoritative? There's not a whole lot of objectivity here.
I see.
And so Orthodox theologians like Callistus Ware will look at this and basically say that they don't have an answer to the question, what is an ecumenical council? They'll go through all the theories, and they themselves will point out none of these work. And so that's why you have figures like Florovsky in Orthodoxy, who wants to just say, look, there's no objective way to identify an ecumenical council. An ecumenical council is a spontaneous event of the Holy Spirit. Oh, okay. I know a whole lot of Protestants who can make that same argument. So that doesn't really give me an objective answer on how to determine what is right, what is wrong, what is definitive, what is not objectively, if we're just relegating this to some kind of subjective movement of the Holy Spirit. Because anybody can claim that they're on board with the Holy Spirit. So that clearly did not work. So a lot of Orthodox will admit they don't have an objective way to identify an ecumenical council. And I will then compare that to Catholicism that does have an objective way, and that's through papal ratification. So if the Pope is receiving it as an ecumenical council, you can consider it an ecumenical council. What I was noticing here is that there's an objective way to identify what's an ecumenical council, and more importantly than what is an ecumenical council, there's an objective way to identify definitive teachings in Catholicism versus Orthodoxy. So yes, maybe not everything has been settled to date in Catholicism.
But it has the structure in place to do it. But we have the
ability to settle issues when needed. So for example, let's just take a doctrinal example. We all agree. Protestants, Orthodox, Catholics would all say that Catholics teach the Immaculate Conception as definitive.
Yeah.
Protestants and Orthodox may or may not agree with it. Most Protestants wouldn't. Some Orthodox might agree with it, some wouldn't. But they would at least say that, yes, Catholics do teach that definitively, right? So even they know that we have the ability to definitively teach something in Catholicism. Whereas if you were to ask that same question in Eastern Orthodoxy, is this true? You're going to get different answers from different Orthodox. So now you have to ask the question, okay, all right, Catholicism has a way to settle this definitively, and it has. Orthodoxy has not only not settled this issue of the Immaculate Conception, but it can't, because it has no objective way to decide these things on that universal level. So I think that that's an example of the difference between the teaching authority of the Catholic Church and Eastern Orthodoxy. Now, what I think an Orthodox could do is say, yes, maybe you as Catholics do have an objective way to identify, what's definitively taught in your communion. Maybe you do have that, but that's not the structure that Christ gave us. The Mormons might actually have an objective teaching authority, an objective magisterium, but that doesn't mean Christ established the Mormon church, right? So just because you have that objectivity doesn't necessarily mean it's a slam dunk for Catholicism. I grant that. I understand that. It could be that Christ gave us a church that doesn't have an objective teaching authority structure, and you can't necessarily identify those definitive teachings objectively. It could be that that's what Christ gave us. But when I look historically at the data, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing the opposite. I'm seeing that he did give us that authority structure. And then I'm seeing where Orthodox historically have accepted that.
Thanks so much for watching. Please like if you liked, and if you loved, subscribe.